gastroenteritis, that is the delayed stomach emptying, gastritis, that is the inflammation of the stomach lining. Next we have peptic ulcer diseases. We will discuss the peptic ulcer disease in detail in the next few slides. Basically, ulcer is the open sores in the mouth, back of the head, shoulder blades, heels, hips, elbows, ankles, back of the knees, toes, feet, and ears. These I have discussed are the pressure ulcers. That are the reason for these ulcers is the bedridden conditions of the patients for a long duration of time. Next, we also have ulcers in the lining of the stomach or the duodenum. That is the first part of the small intestine. Peptic ulcer disease is the broad term that is used for the stomach ulcers and duodenal ulcers. Stomach ulcers is the name that is used for the ulcers that are located in the lining of the stomach, and duodenal ulcers are found in the lining of the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine. So we will discuss the stomach ulcers in detail. Stomach ulcers are the ulcers that are present in the stomach lining. It's a common cause of central stomach pain, pain coming from a very particular spot, often with a burning. But not all stomach ulcers cause noticeable symptoms. Stomach ulcers very common and treatable, but they can be life-threatening if they are not treated timely. Some can continue to erode through the stomach wall until there is a hole, and some can bleed continuously over the time. We can have very common symptoms for the stomach ulcers like indigestion, vomiting, blood, nausea or recurrent upset stomach, loss of appetite, abdominal bloating, burning, etc. Among the causes of stomach ulcers, there are some very common, the major stomach ulcer causes are H. pylori infection, and the next one is NSAIDs. We will discuss these two in detail. First is H. pylori infection. H. pylori is a very common bacterium infection that is found among half of the people worldwide. Sometimes it's overdose in the stomach. As the bacteria continues to multiply, they eat into the stomach lining, causing chronic inflammation that leads to gastric ulcers. Among the causes of H. pylori infections, we have very common causes like person to person. H. pylori can be spread through oral contact. It can also be caused due to the contamination in food and water, that is the unhygienic conditions of food and water. Next is living conditions. As we all know that the conditions in the developing countries is very overcrowded. So the overcrowded living situations and limited access to clean water can also lead to H. pylori infections. Next, hygiene, family history, and lifestyle factors like smoking and prolonged use of NSAIDs, consumption of acidic food regularly, like by the upcoming or these young generations of the life. Next, we have NSAIDs. NSAIDs are the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like ibuprofen, naproxen, and aspirin. The prolonged use of these medications to come back from the pain can irritate the stomach lining on contact, and they also inhibit some of the chemicals that defend and repair stomach lining like bicarbonates. We also have some very less common causes of stomach ulcers like smoking, alcohol, consumption of spicy and acidic foods. Then we have diagnosis and test. Once we are aware of the stomach ulcers present in our stomach, the very basic treatment of this ulcer is the endoscopy. In endoscopy, an upper endoscope goes inside the stomach with a very tiny camera on a long thin tube. This tube goes down our throat while we are under sedation. As we all know, that food is essential for sustaining life, providing the energy, building blocks necessary for growth, repair, and overall bodily functions. Nutrients in food, including carbohydrates, proteins, fats, vitamins, and minerals, play a crucial role in maintaining health, preventing disease, and supporting this immune system. So we have some foods that should be emphasized to prevent ulcers, like the foods that are rich in fiber, probiotics, lean proteins, and those foods which are low in acidity are generally well tolerated and can aid in healing and symptom management. On the other hand, we also have some foods that should be avoided once we know that we have ulcers in our stomach. These foods are spicy food, acidic foods, fatty and fried foods like citrus fruits and tomatoes, caffeine, alcohol should be avoided as they irritate the stomach lining, they increase the acid production and delay the healing process, which worsens the ulcer symptoms. Once we know that we have ulcers, we can use some medications according to the different type of ulcers present. If the reason of ulcers is the H. pylori infection, we can have medications like tetracycline, metronidazole, clarithromycin, amoxicillin. Next, if we have ulcers due to the poor protection of the stomach lining, then they can have medications like sucralfate, misoprostol, bismuth subsalicylate. Next, we have histamine receptor blockers like famotidine, cimetidine, nizatidine. Next, we have proton pump inhibitors, like the medications which will inhibit the use of proton pumps in the stomach lining. These includes esomeprazole, dexlansoprazole, lansoprazole, omeprazole, etc. We will discuss some of the medications one by one in detail. First is tetracycline. Tetracycline is a bacteriostatic antibiotic that reversibly binds to the 30S ribosomal units. Specific functional groups on tetracycline like dimethyl amino groups, as you can see, amide group and phenolic hydroxyl groups play a role in interaction. These groups are crucial for tetracycline's ability to inhibit protein synthesis by interfering with the binding of amino acyl tRNA to the ribosome. Amino acyl tRNA is the molecule that carries the next amino acid to the acceptor site of the ribosome. Now, due to interference of tetracycline, amino acyl transfer RNA cannot bind to the A site and hence the ribosomal can't move along the mRNA to continue adding amino acids to the growing polypeptide chain, effectively halting the protein synthesis. Next, we have clarithromycin. Clarithromycin specifically binds to the 23S RNA within the 50S ribosomal subunit of the bacteria cell, which participates in the protein synthesis. By inhibiting H. pylori protein synthesis, clarithromycin helps to eradicate the bacteria and reduces the risk of ulcers or their recurrence also. Next, we have amoxicillin. By any medication, by any way, if we can prevent the formation of ulcers, we can use that medication as the ulcer prohibition. Like amoxicillin's beta-lactam ring opens to acylate the transpeptidase C-terminal domain of PBP1A. So it inhibits the synthesis of cell wall of bacteria. Next, we have sucralfates. Sucralfates negatively charged molecules interact with the positively charged proteins in ulcer, forming a viscous gel-like barrier that helps to reduce the acidity of ulcer environment. Sucralfate also absorbs bile salts, which can irritate the ulcer site and hinder healing. Next, we have misoprostol. Misoprostol stimulates the secretion of mucus. Bicarbonate thickens the mucosal barrier and improves blood flow to the stomach lining. The combined effects of reduced acid production, protection of lining of the stomach contributes to the stomach's ability to regenerate new cells and heal ulcer. As we have discussed this category of medications which are used for the formation of mucus lining, and also we have discussed the medications that are very well known for the effect on the H. pylori infection. Next category of medication contains H2 receptor antagonists. Activation of S-histamine receptors on parietal cells stimulates the activity of proton pump. The proton pump exchanges H positive ions with the K positive ions into the stomach lining, hence creating the low pH environment in the stomach, which can create ulcers more severely. So H2 receptor antagonists block activation of histamine receptors and therefore reduce acid secretion by parietal cells of the stomach. In the same category of medications, we have famotidine. Famotidine, an H2 antagonist, it blocks the action of histamine on the parietal cells, ultimately reducing acid secretion into the stomach. Next, we have cimetidine. It also binds to the H2 receptor located on the basolateral membrane of the gastric parietal cells, and hence it blocks the histamine effects. Next, we have nizatidine, which acts as a competitive antagonist, meaning it competes with histamine for binding to the H2 receptors. By blocking the histamine signal, nizatidine reduces both basal and stimulated gastric acid productions. Fourth category of medications contains PPIs, that is proton pump inhibitors, the medications which will inhibit the production of H positive ions into our stomach. The gastric acid secretion occurs in the parietal cells via the H positive, K positive ATPase of the proton pump. So this enzyme is responsible for the production of H positive ions into our stomach. So any medication which will prevent its work or its function in the stomach can be used as a medication. In this category, we have isomeprazole. Uh, as we know, this enzyme is responsible for the pumping hydrogen ions into the stomach lumen, which is essential for acid production. So by inhibiting the proton pump, isomeprazole reduces the amount of acid produced in the stomach. Next, we have dexlansoprazole. It also inhibits the action of H positive, K positive enzyme, which can be beneficial in treating conditions like ulcers. Next, we have pantoprazole in the same category. It also leads to the decrease in gastric acid secretion, which is crucial in the treatment of ulcers by reducing the corrosive effects of acids on the stomach lining. I have also mentioned some more proton pump inhibitors with their structures like omeprazole, lansoprazoles. As you can see that all these structures have heteroatoms like nitrogen, oxygen, sulfur present on them, which have a lone pair of electrons basically. So these lone pair of electrons bind with H positive ions produced in our stomach. Hence they reduce the H positive ion concentrations in the stomach, increases the pH and helps in the prevention of ulcers or acidic secretions. Now I'll be discussing triazoles, which are the new emerging medications that can be used for the anti-ulcer treatments. Until now, peptic ulcer, often caused by excessive gastric acid or infection like H. pylori, requires effective therapeutic strategies to promote healing and reduce acid secretion, while traditional treatments like antacid, H2 blockers and proton pump inhibitors. Recent studies highlight the potential of triazole-based compounds. So triazole-based compounds are basically the heterocyclic compounds having 2 carbon and 3 nitrogen atoms on the adjacent positions in 1 to 3 triazoles and at 1, 2 and 4 positions in 1 to 4 triazoles. These triazoles can be used as antioxidant, antibacterial, anti-inflammatory, antifungal, anti-cancer, anti-tubercular activities can be shown by these triazoles. In recent years, the Nobel Prize of 2022 was awarded to Caroline R. Bertozzi, Morten Meldal, and K. Barry Sharpless for their work on click chemistry and bioorthogonal chemistry. That is the chemistry that can make a bridge between the biological and chemical applications in human body, which includes the development of efficient triazole synthesis methods. We will discuss some different methods of triazole synthesis in brief. First is Huygens 1,3 dipolar cycloaddition. Addition. This reaction involves the thermal cycloaddition of an azide to an alkyne. It will give us the two products, that is one 4-regio isomer and one 5-regio isomer in equal concentrations. Next is copper catalyzed azide alkyl cycloaddition. This method has an advantage as compared to Huygens 1,3 dipolar cycloadditions. As we can see that the Huygens 1,3 dipolar cycloaddition gave us the two products, that is one 4-regio isomer and one 5-regio isomer. This specific reaction, copper catalyzed azide alkyne cycloaddition, gives us only one product, that is 1,4 isomer only. So this is a basic comparison between these two cycloaddition reactions. We can also have different, other than these copper catalyzed reactions, other methods that can be used for the formation of triazoles can have strain promoted azide alkyl cycloaddition. As you can see that in reactants we have sp carbons that are forced to be present into the ring, so they are filling a strain in this molecule. So any activity, any reaction that can decrease this strain can be used for the effective formation of the products. In reactant we have sp hybridized carbons, and in products these sp hybridized carbons gets converted into sp2 hybridized carbons, releasing its strain and gives us the triazoles. We also can use other metals for the formation of triazoles like ruthenium. In 2005, Fokin and co-workers devised an efficient approach for the construction of 1,5-disubstituted 1,2,3 triazoles by ruthenium cyclopentadienyl complex. Next, we used silver catalyst for the regioselective synthesis of 1,4-disubstituted 1,2,3 triazoles at room temperature only. Iridium can also be used as the catalyst for the electron-rich internal alkynes for the formation of triazoles. Next, bicyclopentadienyl nickel catalyst can also be used for the formation of di-substituted 1,2,3-triazoles under mild conditions. Zinc catalyzed azide alkyl cycloaddition. It was developed by Postnikovs and his research group, affording 1,4-di-substituted 1,2,3-triazoles. Now we will be discussing some commercial drugs of triazoles, so you guys can have some idea about the basic use of the triazoles in different type of diseases. First is fluconazole. It is used for the treatment of fungal infections. Next also we have posaconazole. It prevents fungal infections in immunocompromised patients. Basically, who are immunocompromised patients? The patients who are fighting from a very serious disease like cancer. The immune system of such patients get reduced, and fungal infections to such patients is more prone. Next we have turconazole. It is used for the vaginal yeast infections. Next we have letrozole. It is used for the treatment of hormone sensitive breast cancer. Then we have trazodone. It is used as an antidepressant and for insomnia. Then we have rufinamide. It can be used for the treatment of epilepsy. In epilepsy, we have strange sensations and emotions, loss of consciousness and awareness, staring, confusion, sudden falls, etc. So rufinamide is used for this kind of epilepsy. Then we have some activities of triazoles like anti-ulcer. Some triazole derivatives have been specifically investigated for their anti-ulcer properties. For example, a 1,2,3-triazole derivative has been shown to promote ulcer healing in rats by multiple mechanisms, including inhibiting H. pylori, reducing oxidative stress, suppressing inflammation, and blocking acid production. This gives us an idea that certain triazoles can directly contribute to the treatment and prevention of ulcers in the human body. Next is anti-H. pylori bacteria. Some triazole derivatives also show activity against H. pylori, which is crucial for treating and preventing peptic ulcers. They can interact with enzymes vital for the survival of H. pylori in this acidic stomach environment, such as carbonic anhydrase. Anti-inflammatory properties, antioxidative effects. Oxidative stress contributes to the gastric mucosal damage and ulcer formation. As we know that the mucosa is the lining that prevents the stomach lining from getting ulcers or from getting corrosion. So triazoles can also be used as the antioxidant effects, which can help in protection of the gastric lining from such damage. Next we have acid secretion. Some triazole compounds have been shown to inhibit gastric acid secretion and exert cytoprotective effects on the gastric mucosa, similar to the proton pump inhibitors used in the ulcer treatment. They can also be used for the reduction of NSAIDs. NSAIDs were non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs which caused ulcers, but often cause gastric ulcers as a major side effect due to the inhibition of prostaglandin synthesis, which are cytoprotective in nature. In conclusion, we can say that the versatility of the triazole scaffolds allows for the synthesis of diverse derivatives with enhanced biological activities, including improved efficacy and reduced side effects compared to some conventional anti-ulcer medications like nizatidine, etc. This broad spectrum of action, coupled with promising in silico, in vitro, and in vivo results, strongly supports the conclusion that triazoles are indeed very efficient anti-ulcer agents with considerable therapeutic potentials. Thank you. Um, Actually, sir, both have approximately stability, but 1 to 4, 1 to 3. बंद ही हो गया वो, उतने में बंद ही हो गया. दोबारा फोटो खिंचा लेना.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for an insightful lesson. Now I would like to call Ms. Parul, a research scholar under the supervision of Professor Gurjaspreet Singh, to present on iron complexes in therapeutics.
Thank you, Tanya, and good morning, everyone. My name is Parul, and I'm a research scholar at Punjab University, Department of Chemistry, Chandigarh. I'm delighted to be here to talk about iron complexes in therapeutics. Today, we are going to explore the most amazing molecule that gives literally lives to our blood, that is hemoglobin. This protein plays a central role in maintaining our body's oxygen supply and is involved in several critical diseases as well. Let's begin. So, let's start with the basics. What is hemoglobin? Hemoglobin is a protein found in red blood cells, which is very crucial, and its main job is to act as a transport vehicle, carrying oxygen from our lungs to all the tissues and organs throughout our body. After delivering oxygen, it then picks up the carbon dioxide and transport it back to the lungs to be exhaled. The key to this function is iron, which is a core component uh, of hemoglobin and allows it to bind to oxygen. As a fascinating side note, it's this very iron that gives our blood its distinctive red color. These are the key points regarding the hemoglobin. Now, coming to the structure of hemoglobin, the creation of hemoglobin is a complex and elegant process. It involves two main parts, the heme group and the globin proteins. The heme part, which contains the iron, is synthesized in the mitochondria and the systole of immature red blood cells. The globin protein chains are produced by ribosomes in the systole. These are the complex series of steps involved in the synthesis of hemoglobin. Now, the normal hemoglobin levels varies according to different age. Like in adult males, it ranges from 13.8 to 17.2, while in adult females, it is from 12.1 to 15.1. Similarly, it ranges from 14 to 24 in newborns and 9.5 to 13 in infants. Not all hemoglobin is the same. There are few different types in our bodies. The most prevalent is hemoglobin A, also known as HbA, which makes up over 95% of the hemoglobin in adults. Then there is hemoglobin A2, a minor component at less than 3.5. Finally comes the hemoglobin HbA2, which is minorly present in the adults. Primary type found in fetuses, and its level drop to under 2% after the birth. Now, what happens when these hemoglobin levels fall too low? This leads to a condition called anemia. So, what is anemia? Anemia occurs when your blood has a fewer red blood cells than normal, or when the red blood cells have doesn't enough hemoglobin to adequately carry oxygen. The result is often feeling fatigued, weak, and short of breath. There are several potential causes of low hemoglobin. The most common cause is iron deficiency. A lack of essential vitamins, particularly vitamin B12 and folate, can also interfere with red blood cell production. The more serious conditions include aplastic anemia, where the bone marrow doesn't produce enough blood cells, and hemolytic anemia, where RBCs are destroyed faster than they can be made. Also, chronic diseases like kidney disease can also contribute to low hemoglobin levels. So, how to maintain healthy hemoglobin levels? Fortunately, there are many ways to support healthy hemoglobin levels through our diet. Firstly, eat iron-rich foods, which includes animal as well as plant sources. The animal sources includes green leafy vegetables, legumes, and many more. Secondly, boost iron absorption. You can enhance your body's ability to absorb iron from the plant sources by pairing them with food rich in vitamin C like citrus fruits and peppers. Next is get enough folate and B12. These vitamins are vital for producing RBCs. At last, limiting inhibitors can also help in boosting the hemoglobin level in our body. So, beyond low levels, there are also a number of genetic diseases related to the structure and production of hemoglobin itself. The main ones are sickle cell disease, thalassemia, hemoglobin C disease, hemoglobin SC disease. Now let's briefly touch on what these are one by one. Firstly is sickle cell disease. In this disorder, RBCs become rigid and sickle-shaped, which impairs their ability to carry oxygen and can cause blockages in blood vessels. Next one is thalassemia. Thalassemia is a group of disorders where the body produces an insufficient amount of hemoglobin, leading to different forms of anemia. Next is hemoglobin C disease. This is an inherited condition where abnormal hemoglobin C is produced instead of normal hemoglobin, resulted in chronic anemia. Next is hemoglobin SC disease. This is a type of sickle cell disease that occurs when a person inherits one hemoglobin S gene and one hemoglobin C gene. There are also other hemoglobin variants, including unstable hemoglobin mutants. So, we have talked about low hemoglobin, but can you have too much also? The answer is yes, and it can also be a problem. A condition known as polycythemia is marked by an excess of RBCs. This surplus can thicken the blood and slow down its flow, which increases the risk of serious complications like blood clot, organ damage, and even stroke. Now, these are the iron distribution in different parts of our body. The hemoglobin contains majorly parts of iron, that is approximately 60%. Now I would like to introduce another key protein, that is ferritin. Ferritin is a universal protein whose primary role is to store iron and release it in a controlled manner. While it doesn't carry oxygen itself, ferritin is crucial for hemoglobin production because it acts as the body's iron reservoir, ensuring that iron is available when needed to make hemoglobin. Now coming to a common point of confusion is between ferritin and hemoglobin. Ferritin is a storage form of iron, while hemoglobin is the active working form of iron that carries oxygen. Both are related but serve different roles in the body. Now, while both are proteins involving iron, they are quite different. Hemoglobin is composed of 4 amino acid chains. The powerful example of hemoglobin structure is sickle cell disease, where a change in a single amino acid in the beta chain from glutamic acid to valine is the cause of entire disorder. Ferritin, in contrast, is a much larger complex made of 24 subunits. Now, given the serious nature of these disorders, there are different stages of iron deficiency. First one is reduced ferritin. When it is catched early, it can be cured properly. If ferritin is reduced in our body, the iron storing unit becomes less. Then stage 2 occurs, which is iron deficiency. Next is anemia. But there are standard treatments include blood transfusion and folic acid supplements. Iron chelation therapy is often necessary to remove the excess iron that can build up the frequent transfusions. Medications like hydroxyurea are best to treat sickle cell anemia by reducing the sickling of red blood cells. More advanced options include stem cell transplants to replace abnormal blood cells with healthy ones, and gene therapy, which aims to correct the root genetic cause. All these leads us to an exciting era of therapeutic research, a class of compounds called triazoles. Triazoles are heterocyclic compounds that are widely known for their antifungal properties in both agriculture and medicine field. More recently, scientists have been exploring their fascinating interaction with the hemoglobin. These are the various uses of triazole when binded with the metal ion, that is antimicrobial, anti-ecoplastic, anti-HIV, anti-ulcer, enzyme inhibitor, and many more. So what is this interaction we are talking about? Triazoles can influence hemoglobin's affinity for oxygen, Specifically, certain triazole compounds have been demonstrated to increase the affinity of hemoglobin for oxygen, causing the hemoglobin to bind oxygen more readily. So how do they do this? Let's discuss the mechanism of action. Triazole function as allosteric modifiers. This means they bind to a site on the hemoglobin molecule that is separate from the oxygen binding site. As it is shown in previous figure, the iron binding site is different from the heme protein. Now,